Saw it. All right. Thank you. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us today for this WiCyS and Wayfair webinar. We're so excited to have Rachna available from Wayfair to be discussing with Zero Trust for the Rest of Us, which I love that title. And so Rachna will go into a little bit more detail of that title and the topic in just a few seconds here. But my name is Lynn Dome. I'm Women in Cybersecurity Executive Director. We often go by our acronym WiCyS, WICYS, and we pronounce it WiCyS, like we sisters, because we are a cyber sisterhood, a global cyber sisterhood. And our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. We have over 5,700 members with representation in over 70 countries. We also have 50 professional affiliates throughout Africa, Australia, Canada, France, India, Pakistan, the UK, and throughout the United States. And we have specialty affiliates like WiCyS Critical Infrastructure, WiCyS Cloud Security, WiCyS Artificial Intelligence, and so many other specialty affiliates as well. On top of that, we have over 170 student chapters with a global student chapter initiative of reaching 23 more countries by the end of next year. So since our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity, what we do is we create opportunities. We have an online member forum where all our members can network and connect. We have skill development training programs funded by Google, Meta, Bloomberg. We have Target funding the Cyber Defense Challenge, Fortinet offering the NSE4 certification summer camp. We have programs also run by SANS Institute and other strategic partners as well. We offer scholarship grants and awards not only for our conference, which is coming up March 16th through the 18th in Denver, Colorado, and it will be here in a blink of an eye. It's hard to believe it's already August, but we offer scholarship grants and awards for other conferences as well. We have webinars, newsletters, speaking and media opportunities. All of that is for us to be what others can see, and that's the cybersecurity professionals that we are. Our Cyber Talent Emergency Fund is available for aspiring professionals that have true financial emergencies, like a medical expense, or can't afford rent, or their car breakdown. We don't want anyone to have that financial emergency derail them from their cybersecurity studies. We also have apprenticeship programs, internship programs, leadership summits, leadership series, leadership workshops, and so many other opportunities within the organization. So we owe all that special thanks to our strategic partners, AWS, Bloomberg, Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, Cisco, Fortinet, Google, Intel, Lockheed Martin, Meta, Microsoft, Optum, Sandia National Labs, SentinelOne, and of course, Wayfair that brings us this webinar here today. So I encourage you to ask Rachna a lot of questions today. So this is your opportunity as she's presenting, and the bottom of your screen is a box there for you to put your questions in, and we're going to queue them up. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to have Q&A opportunity for her to answer these live. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the WiCyS newsletter. We are moving at a rapid rate. We're launching programs and we're doing all sorts of different initiatives. But the best way to stay in tune and tapped into all things within WiCyS is through subscribing to our newsletter. And so with that, I'm going to pass the mic on over to for Rachna to take it from here.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, let's get in. And thank you for the great introduction. So hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the people who are attending this seminar from different parts of the world. I'm Rachna Kamath, your presenter for today, and I'm going to talk about Zero Trust for the rest of us. Through this presentation, I hope to take you through a guided tour of fundamentals, concepts, insights, and implementation strategies for Zero Trust architecture and take you an initial step for the Zero Trust environment. Moving ahead. So here's our agenda for today. So we are going to start with a quick introduction about myself. I'll take a step back to help you understand what are the different security challenges which prompted the adoption of Zero Trust. We'll try to understand Zero Trust fundamentals using an animation. We'll go through and understand how different data breaches and security incidents could have been resolved if Zero Trust was adopted. We'll try to understand the components, the pillars, and the deployment strategies of Zero Trust. And then we'll go through the Zero Trust maturity model, and I'll provide you with a small glimpse of how Wayfair adopted Zero Trust. So let's get into it. So This is your guide for today. That's me, Rachna Kamath. I work as a security engineer in the enterprise cybersecurity team at Wayfair. Our main goal is to provide a secure and a scalable platform to all the business and employees so that they can work perfectly and efficiently without causing any problems and at the same time enabling innovation. So, more background about me. I have completed my master's in cybersecurity from Northeastern University, Boston. I recently joined the WiCyS New England affiliate as an academic outreach to bridge the gap between students in the New England areas and professionals. I was able to attend the WiCyS conference in 2021 and 2022 and had an amazing time meeting the peers and learning about the different academic teachers who were actually promoting security as a career option. At the same time, all the students who were so hardworking and curious to learn about security. So that's all about me. Let's just go ahead and talk about zero trust. So in the traditional network security parameterized model, we follow the castle and the gate mode architecture, which basically means like we trusted everything and everyone that is inside the network and not did not trust anything that was outside. This was a problem because it provided open access to everything that is inside the network without additional checks. Malicious actors were able to get into your system, like using phishing mails, malware infiltration, or misconfigured systems, which basically provide you with open access and they were able to move laterally without any additional checks or any alarms of their presence. This allowed users to get unlimited and basically compromise your data and at the same time disrupt systems. So, at the same time, if you think about it, we are not a single environment anymore. There is not a single plane anymore. So, basically, there are with advancement in cloud technologies, organizations are basically moving their workload to cloud. At the same time, more and more people are working not just from their offices but from their home using personal devices. We are also encouraging the advancement of cloud platforms like SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. So, just to put it straight out there, people, process, and technology are changing. So, the binary concept of inside or outside is not just applicable right now. So, let's go ahead and talk about how zero trust came in and how that's helpful. So here's a definition about that NIST gave for zero trust. I would say the most important part in this definition is the second half of the segment. The reason why I say that is we have to move from a zero implicit trust to an assured trust. So zero trust encourages you to ask questions like, who is trying to access this data? How are they trying this? We have to go ahead and actually do some pre-checks to make sure that all the requirements have been satisfied. How frequently we should go back and make this check again to make sure that we have a secure connection throughout the session. So you must be thinking that getting into zero trust is really daunting. But remember, it is an incremental process between people, process, and technology to pave the road to mitigate the challenges that we get from the workforce dynamic changes that we are seeing, more and more data that we are working with, and at the same time, we have moving into cloud environments. So these are the things that we have to think about. Moving ahead, I'll help you to understand the fundamental of zero trust using a cute little animation that I made there. So here is a child that I came back from school and a stranger actually opened the door in his house. She says, "Hey, let's go out and play. I'm your mother's friend." The child is looking at the stranger. She's in his house, so they should be okay with it, right? He should directly go out. If you're thinking, no, because she's a stranger, that's right. And that's exactly what zero trust is for. The kid, what basically does is like he runs to the kitchen and asks his mom, "Hey, mom, do you know who this person is? And can I go out to play with her?" The mom looks at the stranger, who is basically her friend, and say, "Yes, definitely, you can go out." So, if you look at this at on a zero trust angle, the kid here is the resource or the data that users usually ask for access. The stranger in this context is the subject or the user who wants access to the resource. And the mother acts as a decision point who makes sure that all the pre checks are completed before they can get access. So, as a stranger is no longer a stranger, the kid can basically go out and play. So, basically, subject is able to get the resource in the required manner. Hopefully, this presentation actually helped you understand what zero trust is. So you must have heard about the executive order that came forward that promotes the adoption of zero trust to fight against sophisticated attacks on the network. At the same time, it also encourages the adoption of multi-factor authentication and and data encryption while in transit and at rest. So this is the most important thing that we will talk about more in the next slides. CISA at the same time has been a guiding force who actually helps us to get more resources and helps you in the zero trust journey. So you can actually read these articles that are really interesting and will help you to get an understanding of the maturity model as well and what's required to actually get to a point where you can say that you have started implementing zero trust in your environment. So now that you have understood what zero trust is, the next thing that I'll say is let's talk about the zero trust principles. These are the building blocks on which the zero trust is working. So the number one is the visibility, automation, and orchestration. I would say this is the most important pillar because it helps you to understand where exactly in the maturity model your zero trust architecture is. Telemetry information from a lot of enterprise and security tools will help you get confidence about the subject information, events, and sessions that can be used by your decision point to make sure can it grant an access to a particular resource, a yes or a no. Further ahead, the second one is application level access. I would say this is the most distinguishing factor from a network level access because it moves your access level from the network over to an application that was as close as possible from the resource. Third, adaptive trust. This is the thing which is unlike in a traditional model. You don't get an access and that's done and dusted. There's an adaptive trust that continuously evaluates that you make sure that you are in the desired posture before you can actually go ahead and get access. If anything changes in between, it looks at this context and makes sure whether you can continue having that access or it has to be mediated or like pulled down to a minimum possible. The fourth one is the comprehensive in identity management. Now, subjects are the one that actually go ahead and work with the data. So I would say this is the most important part because you need to define, identify, and maintain this identity so that you can have a good and a strong authentication and authorization policy. You maintain their provisioning and at the same time deprovisioning to maintain that entire access life cycle for any particular identity that wants to access your resources. And last is the continuous health monitoring system. Now, in the continuous health monitoring system, you can think about as it has multiple hats. The first one is a traditional system of logging. So basically, it will correlate the events that it sees for a particular subject and mark or alert on suspicious activities and prevent the traffic to go ahead. At the same time, it can also help you for like posture management, help you understand what are the different vulnerabilities that are active for a particular user agent, and at the same time, it will help you to also understand what kind of patch management or encryption does the device or the user agent work with. So that's all about the principles for zero trust. Let's move ahead and think how these particular data breaches would have been mitigated if the zero trust was adopted. So you must have heard about the colonial pipeline hack that happened in May of last year. The main reason for this particular data breach was an inactive VPN account that was used by the malicious actors to compromise the system. They did a data exfiltration of 100 gigabytes of data in a 2-hour window. At the same time, they also infiltrated the system with malware. So, how can this be mitigated? When we think about it from the principal side of view, the main thing or the root cause of this issue was an inactive VPN account. That takes us back to the identity management cycle. Remember, we talked about deprovisioning? Yes, that's the one we are talking about. So, deprovisioning of an inactive VPN account could have actually mitigated this problem in a huge risk. For example, in a zero trust, reuse of a password of or a single factor authentication is a big no. Now let's move ahead with USPS. So IVS is basically an informed visibility system which allows users to basically go ahead, log in into the USPS website and query for user information. So when I say user information, this was not just for your user, but also for other users. You get information about their login, their user ID, their account number, street address, phone number, and a lot of different information. The main cause why this was happening, it was taking the login user as an authenticated user, but it was also using as an authorized session. So if we look back at our principles, the main thing that could have prevented this is context-aware access evaluation. The reason why I say is it basically says all login users can actually do whatever they want. It does not look at user permission, does not look at where the user is, what kind of permission the user has, and how can you evaluate the access. So actually using adaptive trust or context-aware access evaluation would have prevented this data. And the last thing that I have there is the Twitch attack. So because of the Twitch data breach, they were able to get proprietary information from SDKs. At the same time, they're able to get payout information and commit statuses from as long as from the beginning. Now, this could have been prevented because if you remember zero trust principles, continuous health monitoring allows to check and maintain make sure that it is we have an integrity maintained throughout the security posture of the traffic. At the same time, it is authenticated. So thus, X GB of data that was being data exfiltrated in a Y amount of time to an unknown location would have been prevented using an alert or just an direct mitigation servicing to not allow such actions. So now that you have learned about this, you know that as and more data breaches are becoming frequent, it is very important to talk about the zero trust cybersecurity paradigm and use information from our network, infrastructure, and assets to improve upon our security posture. Now, now that we have learned about the zero trust principles, here is a diagram that NIST has provided to understand zero trust components. I'll break this diagram for you so that you can understand each and every component and we can talk more about it. I would say the brain of the zero trust component is the policy engine and the policy administrator. The policy engine basically takes input from a lot of different systems that you see on the slide. At the same time, it takes input from organizational policy and puts that into a trust algorithm which says, okay, these are the different information that I get for a particular system. Is it a go or a no go to access? Policy administrator basically acts as a mediator which takes the information from policy engine and tells the policy enforcement point to start or stop an action. The policy enforcement point, I would say, is a single logical point which basically acts as a proxy or a gateway that takes the decisions that the policy administrator passed through and makes sure that only authenticated and authorized traffic are allowed to go ahead. As you can see, there are a lot of different systems on the slides that are giving input to the control panel. You can use this. You can use the information. For example, Rachna is logging in from USA. She is authenticated using a single sign-on and security key for authentication. At the same time, it looks like she has a low user sign-in risk. So policy engine takes this into account and makes sure that for an enterprise application A, these are the requirements, and she was able to pass them. It sends that information to policy administrator. Policy administrator says, go ahead for the policy enforcement point, and the policy enforcement point then basically allows the traffic to move ahead. So Rachna is able to access the resource. Now, these data systems can be any data systems or enterprise security tools which help you to basically understand what is the main or like deviate from like what is the main untrusted traffic, how can you get information about the traffic to make it a trusted traffic and then move ahead with it. So that's all about the zero trust components. Now that you have understood the zero trust components, let's move ahead and talk about zero trust pillars. Now, zero trust pillars, to put it in the simple terms, will help you to move from implicit trust to more of like an assured trust. So organizations usually go at this pillar one at a time or concurrently, depending on different factors. But let's just start talking about it one at a time. Identity. I would say this is the most important pillar that most of the organization usually start focusing on. With the identity, you are able to basically improve upon your strong authentication policies, authorization policies, using context analysis from what kind of information you're getting about a particular subject. Are you able to verify the subject is saying who it is? And if possible, take context more from the devices that we're talking about next, and then go ahead and grant the access. At the same time, I can give you an example. Let's just say I'm going ahead and using passwordless authentication like biometric or some kind of web authentication, which will basically saying Rachna is able to authenticate to a system using her biometric information or a security key that she owns. And that will basically reduce down your dynamic risk scoring for the sign-in from a medium or a high to a low, because it's looking at the stronger authentication that you're able to give. Moving ahead on the device policies, we can have strict device policies which validates what a particular device is trying to access a resource. For example, this can be done by asking the question, how can I say the device is compliant or not? That can be understood by understanding where the device, what kind of device it is. Is it a personal device? Is it something that the company is owning? Or is it something that the company can manage using MDM or some other solutions? At the same time, it is important to understand that having a comprehensive list of your device inventory up to date is very important in the zero trust architecture. Network and application, I would say they work together to give a comprehensive solution so that you're able to support application user traffic to go ahead with full content inspection. At the same time, you can make sure that it is transmitted in encryption and also at rest. And finally, and the most important part I would say is the data, because the data is what the access policies at the data are the closest to a resource. So making sure that you have understood the data categorization, classification, and you're honoring the least privilege by having only giving the permission that the user actually needs to work with the data. So now that you have understood the zero trust principles, let's go into the pillars one by one and talk more about it. So identity, I would say, is the most common dominator because it's the one which basically triggers to actually get access to the data. So it is very important to have a single plane of control on on managing the identities that are deployed both on premise or in cloud. Having a single sign-on or any kind of like a single authentication page would be able to help you with this objective. At the same time, it is easy to understand, and it is very important at the same time to understand that there are not just one subject, a human user. It can be a headless service, it can be an external service, it can be an API, or it can even be a network object. So it is very important to understand and identify all these different subjects, how they authenticate it, how they authenticate to your systems or your environment, and how can you use risk and context analysis to make better decisions and informed decisions for your access. Let me give you an example. Let's just say you have a web application page, and there are different roles that are attached to it. There's an administrator and there is a viewer. Now, if you look at a risk profiling standpoint, an administrator will have a higher risk because it has permissions that can allow it to perform actions which can make changes to a system. So it is very important to make sure that there is a stringent access policy for an administrator as compared to a viewer. Coming back to the example, let's just say I have an access policy which says an administrator can only get access to a cloud console if they are able to provide an MFA, which is a security key or a biometric authentication or a authentication. And if they are able to provide this information along with sign-in risk, saying medium sign-in risk or a low sign-in risk, only then they are able to go ahead and access the resource. This is something that we call as context-aware and adaptive access control. This is a really great example that Microsoft has put in, and I'll encourage you to go and read about context aware access and how that can be useful in your environment. Moving ahead, the second most important thing is the device, because that's the one that the human users usually use to reach out to a particular resource. It is very important that it maintains the same level of trust. Now, a device can have a different threat profile depending on two important parameters. One is the device management, and second is device posture. So let's just think about this. A device which is being owned by a company or being managed by a company has enough control and visibility over it can be considered as a low risk or a low threat profile as compared to something which is like a personal device which the organization does not have any access or visibility over. So you can ask, remember when we asked the question for the policy engine, what are the different ways that you can use and incorporate the data? Device compliance can be one of them. How can you define device compliance is by using information from your central device management or some other user agents which provide you information about, is the device encrypted? Does the device have BitLock? Does the device has the EDR tools or the security tools as required? At the same time, is the device able to have the right patch level that would be required to access the resources? Getting all this information is really important to help us understand the device posture, the device security posture. At the same time, remember when we said about device inventory, it is a very great challenge, I would say, to maintain a device inventory which is up to date. But you can use integration from different platforms. At the same time, APIs from different vendors, which will help you to get a source of truth about the device asset or the device or the assets in your organization. Moving ahead, the third one is the network and application. So in the network and application perspective, I would say it is very important to have a logical segregation between a trust zone, which is close to an application, and anything that is trying to touch or get access to the application should be able to prove it is at the same trust zone as the others. So, for example, let's just say that you're trying to access system or an application which is in cloud, how do you go ahead and make sure that you can access it? You can have network security policies which says, I'm coming from a device and it has an MTLS certificate. If there's a network device that wants to make sure that it can talk to any particular application on the system, it can use any kind of 802.1x certificate to authenticate that it is the particular asset that it's saying to be. So these are the different ways that you can use network security policies to be incorporated in your zero trust environment. At the same time, if you look at the other way around, if you are a corporate employee working on a corporate system, you're trying to reach out to the internet, it is very important to understand that you're going from a high trust zone to a low trust zone with high risk profile. So it is important that we should have some kind of a layer 7 filtering so that you do not get access to some command and control center or which can present malware infiltration. At the same time, the very last thing that I can say here is the accessibility point, which is basically you can have access to enterprise application directly via the internet, and you can make sure that only authenticated and authorized users can go and access it without the requirement of VPN. We'll be talking more about this during the Wayfair Zero Trust journey. And the very last thing, but definitely not the least, is the data. It is very important for an organization to understand what are the different data sources, how to prioritize and understand what is the most confidential and sensitive data for your environment, tag and label them so that people know what kind of data they are working with, have data loss prevention rules. At the same time, make sure that you have those data encrypted while in transit and iterate. These are the fundamental data security things which can be incorporated to make sure you can also support the zero trust architecture. The very last thing I would like to add is data exfiltration is an important challenge that we need to tackle. It's very important to monitor classified data that you have in your environment and look at the correlation information from other pillars like your devices and resources and users and identities to finally devise if a particular event or a particular session is trying to exfiltrate data to an unknown location, and you can trigger that. This is what exactly I was talking about when we were talking about Twitch data breach. Okay, so we have understood about all the different pillars. Now let's talk about the maturity model. Most of the organizations that start their journey in zero trust can be either in the traditional range or can be in between the traditional and advanced range. I would say the main difference between the traditional and the advanced range is the traditional system, everything is manually configured. A few things would not be able to show interoperability. No context between who is trying to access, and it's more of like an on-prem environment. Advanced can be when most of the organization are reaching today. They are hybrid or they're completely in cloud. They're trying to semi-automatize things so that they can mitigate a few risk and actions as and when they are triggered. So, a few things that we need to understand while doing this is you can actually start with the pillars one at a time, or you can focus on them concurrently. But the few things that come into mind is one, what is the current structure of the pillar that you're talking about? Is it easy to get a particular result for that objective in a short period of time with less efforts? Then you can focus on a single pillar. At the same time, if there are human resources or platforms or security tools which are able to provide more information about that particular pillar and help you to achieve a particular goal with automation, that's the second reason. The very last reason that I can think about is the clear ownership of a particular pillar and responsibilities related to what is required to achieve a particular goal. That can be the third one. So this is what I think would help you to understand, do you want to go with one pillar at a time or like concurrent pillars? Uh, and the very last thing is the optimal stage. This is when the telemetry is at its max. You're able to get information from a lot of different platforms. You're able to have assignments to users and assets concurrently. At the same time, the access policies are very granular and they are self-evaluating to optimize the decision. And at the same time, there's remediation task that's automatic as well. You don't have to be you don't need a manual intervention, but there's a threshold that's being defined that can help you to actually go ahead and make those decisions. So we have understood about everything that we need to do about zero trust. But let's just embark on how you can go ahead and actually start your zero trust journey. Before you start your zero trust journey, it is very important to start the discovery phase. In this phase, You get identify your business stakeholders and your technical stakeholders and decide about budget, timeline, resources, and the same time objective. Now, this objective can be as big as like data loss prevention strategy, or it can be as simple as how do we go ahead and make sure that we have stronger authentication in our environment. So it's very important to address all these different things before you can go ahead and actually start the assessment. So let's just say you have completed with all the discovery and you are very encouraged to go ahead with the assessment phase. In the assessment phase, what you can do is you can map out your current infrastructure, try to understand what are the different identities, actors, and the assets that you want that will be working on this, they'll be working in this environment. What are the workflows that these different actors have in regards to your data? And at the last time, what are the current security controls and platforms that can be used to actually help you achieve your goal? So, if you're completed with your assessment, the next step is design and deployment. For your design, you can work with the security architects, engineers, and network engineers to actually create a project plan and a zero trust architecture design. This will also involve the POC phase where you go ahead and understand the different actors that are working with it and then create policies to understand how much granular access do you want to grant for a particular resource. Mapping this out in a single plane or in a single document and then brainstorming about it can help you understand and bring out more information about what are the different compliance policies, what are the different authentication requirements that we require for a particular resource. Last, I would say it is very important to complete a POC so that you can validate that your zero trust architecture is working fine and it's verifying all the mappings that you have done for the resource and the subject. Let's just say you have completed the POC and now you're ready to go ahead and actually do the deployment in prod. If you do that, it is very important to understand to monitor all the different data access points that you can. This is important because we will talk about more in the next step in the gap analysis and how you can use this monitoring information. Next, you have to train your users to understand what this particular zero trust journey is, how is it useful for them. At the same time, you have to get information about cost and performances. Once that's done, you can go ahead and actually deploy that in prod. So you have deployed everything in a prod, so time to celebrate, correct? Yes, definitely it's a time to celebrate, but at the same time, it is important to understand that now you have created a baseline for your zero trust architecture. From the monitoring, you will get information about what went right, what went wrong. Try to understand those gaps and how you can improve them in the next stages. Now that you've understood, let's just say you have gone ahead and said, we have improved the authentication in our environment. How do you go ahead and actually improve it in such a way that you have almost reached the optimal of the maturity model? And the last thing I would say is optimization. This is not just about optimizing your cost or your performance, but it's also optimizing your resources that you're using in. So that's all about your zero trust deployment strategies. Let's move ahead and talk about Wayfair's journey. Wayfair has started its journey, I think 2018, way before I joined it, and it has been an exciting journey for everyone. The main problem statement that we try to resolve is how can employees get secure access from anywhere to enterprise applications without requiring VPN? And that's what gave birth to the Wayfair Trusted Access Platform, or WTAP as we call it. WTAP is basically a system which gave access to our employees access to a few of the enterprise applications over the internet. How we did that is we had an open source load balancer in front of our entire infrastructure, which help us with header checks, which checks whether if you're coming from a company owned device or not. And depending on the routing rule and what enterprise application access policies are, it will route it to the perfect backend service. Now, before you do that, it's very important to authenticate it. So we have our SSO, which will help us to authenticate the service and then send it back to the backend service. This infrastructure was really important, and I would say a great way to help us understand that how zero trust can help us strike the perfect balance between security and usability. Now, we have moved way ahead from the WTAP model and we are now trying to adopt the Beyond Cobb Enterprise suite. How this suite actually helps us is we are using the threat protection system to make sure that our workforce users, mobile workforce, and all the other employees, such as contractors and partners, are actually able to access it directly from their Chrome browsers and make sure that they are not reaching out to malware infected websites and through URL reputation. At the same time, we are also POCing a few different things, which will basically help us replicate the same architecture that we had for WTAP by using Google Cloud Native services like Identity Aware Proxy that will sit in between the resources and make sure that only authenticated users can go ahead and access it. At the same time, we have something called as access policies, which help us to provide those granular access controls to our first-party application, at the same time to our third-party SaaS application. So, in all, I would say it has been an exciting journey. We have had a few challenges, we are learning from them, but at the same time, we are looking forward to the next steps in Zero Trust journey. So now you have understood everything about zero trust, and you want to go ahead on this journey. But all problems have solutions, and before you can reach the solution, there are some hurdles that you need to cross. These are the few challenges that you can expect to face when you're going into a zero trust journey. Number one is buy-in. This is important because zero trust is a long initiative. It will take multi-year efforts. At the same time, it will require you to have alignment with a lot of different business stakeholders and make sure that this is being prioritized as one of the important projects in your organization. There may be a few legacy systems which follow a more of a traditional authentication flow, let's just say LDAP authentication, and may not be able to work with your systems, which would require interoperability or more of context-based access. And it might be difficult for you to actually go ahead and then do a lift and a shift. You may need to have come together and discuss about what are the different alternatives that you can use for such legacy systems. Last, but I was most important thing is that, as you saw, there are a lot of frameworks, security models, and project plans you need to think about. It is very important to come together, do brainstorm sessions, learn about the different ways that you can actually go ahead and solve a particular problem, and have the most important thing, alignment between all the stakeholders throughout your organization for a particular solution. So that's all that I had about the challenges. Zero trust is definitely an all-encompassing approach, but at the same time, it has its fair share of challenges. So be ready for these things, but at the same time, be excited to go ahead in this journey. So that's all that I had for you today. Before I go ahead in the questions, I have to thank my team at Wayfair. They have been really encouraging and supporting me, not just being a good security engineer, but they are also helping me with my curiosity and career goals. So thank you so much. And last but not the least, the women in cybersecurity team, Shakota and Len, they have been really helpful. And thank you for attending this webinar at the same time arranging it. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with you all. So that's all. That's all that I had for today, and I'm open to any questions that you have. Yeah, Len, over to you.
Hi, that was wonderful. Thank you. So much information. It was hard for me to even like tweet as fast as the information was coming. So it was fabulous. Thank you so much for presenting on the zero trust for the rest of us. So I do have a question, Rashna, and that is, when you're discussing like the zero trust security paradigm, even within where, like, what are the most commonly asked questions to you? What comes to what comes to the forefront of those questions?
I was divide this question into two parts. So the question from like an employee, so the user standpoint is, how do we access a particular applications? What are the requirements that we need to access a particular application, and what's changing? And more on the stakeholders or like engineer standpoint is to try and understand what the architecture is and how do we go ahead and actually deploy it. There are a lot of different things. We start with a particular problem and say, okay, this is straightforward. We can go ahead and actually deploy it. But when you actually started to build out a particular architecture, you try to understand there are a lot of different components that are actually required that you require to look into it before you can go ahead and give a solution. So the questions, to just say it earlier, it's more of like usability questions that we get, and more of like the deployment questions, like how do you go ahead and actually deploy this without affecting the systems which are talking to each other.
Very good. And then how did you get involved? Like, how did you land in the zero trust security paradigm and discussing this and implementing it all? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a funny question actually, because I actually started interviewing for my full time after I graduated from my college, and I was actually interviewing for Wayfair. And my manager asked me this question: do you know what zero trust is? At the time, I had no clue of what zero trust is, and I said, no, I didn't know what zero trust is. Then he gave me a few white papers to read and said, these are some good white papers, and you should definitely go ahead and read them. So I went ahead and actually read those white papers. It was really exciting for me. So when I really joined Wayfair after my graduation, there were a few seniors I mentioned in my slide that actually helped me to understand zero trust much better from the inside out, and it's really exciting. It's a new concept, not something that. It's not something that we talk about in a normal talk. Like we usually talk about best practice in security, and zero trust is something which is trending, and that's why I decided, okay, this is something that's really exciting. Has a lot of challenges. I love solving challenges, and that's why I decided that I want to learn more about zero trust.
Yeah, you could tell you're very passionate about it, which means that you're like authentic, genuine self was just extremely curious about it, which led you down this path. And then, so thank you for being able to present this information to the WiCyS community. And speaking of that, a question came in. Well, first is a statement, fantastic presentation, which I think we could all agree on. That was a great presentation. But this individual said they really liked the way you presented it. What do you think was key in convincing the stakeholders to invest in a zero trust architecture?
Oh, definitely a good question. So I would say the main thing that I have understood, since I have not directly talked to like stakeholders, but what I understand from the meetings and everything is, it's very important to make them understand what the advantages of this would be. That is more from like a performance standpoint. How can users benefit from this? For example, as we talk about the WTAP architecture, the usability was really great. You can access a particular application anywhere, and you do not need a VPN for this. At the same time, there are a few applications that you can actually access without requiring to be on a company-owned device. So those are the things that actually help your business to be more productive. They help you to become more independent of the fact that where you're working from, if you're on your way to a plane, or if you do not have your laptop but you're on a mobile, you can still go ahead and actually do it. So showing that in metrics about advantages, at the same time performance of how that can help you improve accessibility is the most important thing, I would say.
Great, thank you. Another question asks, what metrics did you use to measure the success of deployment of zero trust? And what ongoing metrics do you measure? Very good question.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say the same thing, but at the same time, when you ask me about particular metrics, I would say performance metrics. If I'm deploying an architecture, to am I getting issues, tickets, more tickets about issues? Is that something that we want to look into? Are we solving any issues that we are getting in the past with, let's just say, VPN access issues? We usually get tickets for that. How are we actually helping out to actually reduce those tickets for VPNs? At the same time, I would say metrics around cost, like are we reducing any ongoing cost that comes with requiring VPN access? Are we reducing any access policies and having much better secure access to a particular thing with requiring zero trust architecture? So performance, throughput, and I would say any kind of operation tickets that can be reduced by this are some of the good metrics for it.
Great. And another question came in is if you were willing to share the white papers that you read that interested you, that got you all started on this pathway.
Definitely. I can share after this meeting, but if you just Google about like Beyond Cobb Enterprise white papers, you can also look into like NIST framework for zero trust, and the other one that I could think about is CSAM maturity model. These are the few white papers that I have read recently. There's also a book from O'Reilly called Zero Trust something. I'll definitely send out the link later, but the O'Reilly book is really nice if you want to understand the core concepts of zero trust.
Great. Great. And so speaking of that, I think it would be a good time if you're willing to share your contact information. If anyone has any additional questions, they could go ahead and reach out to you directly. And then I believe you, yep, there we go. Yeah, so please connect on LinkedIn, and we have the email right there to ask any additional questions, to receive the white papers, or to follow up with anything that Rashna has covered in today's presentation, but I just want to take a moment to thank you for your time and attention, Rashna, for joining us here today. WiCyS community is fulfilled with having you as a part of it, so I really appreciate not only Wayfair's strategic partnership and their ongoing support and contributions to the entire community, but also you being a part of the community as well and sharing your knowledge and expertise. And I also want to thank the audience for taking a moment of your afternoon and being a part of the WiCyS organization and joining us here today. So with that, if you have any additional questions about WiCyS, you can address those questions at info@wicys.org. And if you have any questions about the presentation or any materials shared, please reach out to Rashna with this information from LinkedIn and her email that's on the screen right now. And so I think that's a wrap. And someone said, go Huskies, fellow NU grads. So woohoo, yeah, that's great. So, well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Rashna, and you have a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to syncing up again sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope I get to meet a lot of people during the next WiCyS conference, so take care until we meet then.
Yes, can't wait.
Yep, definitely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.